In the freezing winter of New York, amidst the indifferent crowd and dazzling lights, a young man named Barron stopped. A simple gesture, a heartfelt promise. Could these be enough to change Leonard's entire life? The bustling streets, towering skyscrapers glowing with lights, and the festive spirit filled every corner of the city. Stores were lavishly decorated with twinkling lights, enormous Christmas trees adorned with sparkling ornaments, creating a breathtaking scene. People hurried about, shopping and preparing for a holiday filled with warmth and love. Yet, amidst this lively and bustling atmosphere, there was a starkly contrasting image, tucked away in a forgotten corner on Broadway. Leonard, a homeless black man, sat slumped against the wall of an old convenience store. He wore clothes that were old and tattered, barely enough to withstand the bone-chilling cold of a New York winter. His faded coat, torn pants, and worn-out shoes did little to shield him from the biting cold that pierced through his skin. He sat silently, holding a piece of cardboard with hastily scribbled words, "Spare a dime." The passers-by never stopped. The sound of blaring car horns and hurried footsteps crunching the snow seemed to sweep him away, rendering him invisible. A ghost in the heart of the city. It had been more than a year since Leonard started living on the streets. The harsh days had stripped him of everything he once held dear. He had lost his job, his home, and eventually his faith in people and life itself. Each day he was left with faint, fleeting dreams of a different life, a life he once had, where he was loved, cared for, and valued. Now the city had become an unfamiliar place, a space where people only noticed one another when they needed something. For someone like Leonard, there was no place in it. But today, perhaps, was different. In the piercing cold of winter, amid the city brimming with festive cheer, something special had reached Leonard. A strange feeling, like a faint, warm ray of light piercing through the icy darkness of his soul. Though he couldn't name the sensation, he couldn't deny that something, however small, had changed. Before long, a middle-aged woman, dressed in a vibrant red coat with her long black hair cascading over her shoulders, approached Leonard. She stopped, her eyes scanning the cardboard sign in his hands, and her gaze softened with compassion. Without saying a word, she reached into her purse, pulled out a bill, and gently placed it in Leonard's hand. She offered him a warm smile and, before walking away, uttered a simple yet heartfelt phrase, "Merry Christmas." Leonard watched her leave, feeling something indescribable stir within him. It wasn't perfect salvation or a miraculous transformation of his life, but it was a rare moment of care, a sign that in this hurried and indifferent world, there were still people willing to share a piece of their heart. That feeling, however small, made him feel like he wasn't entirely forgotten. Christmas in New York, with all its splendor and cheer, isn't always an easy time for everyone. For Leonard, the holiday wasn't about lavish parties or extravagant gifts. It was about a moment, a brief glimpse of humanity in a cold world. A small act, but one powerful enough to warm his heart through the most difficult days. While the pain of the past still lingered, Leonard found comfort in knowing that, even in the darkest of times, a light could be found in the kindness of others. This Christmas didn't bring Leonard a grand change, but it gave him something he had lost long ago. Hope. Strangers, with even the smallest gestures, reminded him that people could still be a light to one another in the bleakest moments. And for Leonard, that was the greatest gift he could receive this Christmas. In the biting cold of a New York winter, Leonard sat there, an invisible figure amidst the hurried crowd. No one paid him any attention, even as Christmas approached, and people busied themselves with parties and gifts. He was just a homeless man, someone whose name didn't make it onto the list of those worth noticing. Yet today, something was different. A small, unexpected sign appeared in this bustling world, a moment where familiar glances, usually fleeting and indifferent, lingered for just a little longer. Leonard sat on the crowded sidewalk of Broadway, holding a simple cardboard sign that read, "Spare a dime." People walked past without so much as a glance. Most were preoccupied with their lives, rushing to their destinations. No one stopped. No one noticed a man struggling to survive the brutal winter, dressed in nothing but tattered clothes and worn-out shoes. And then, as if by some miracle, A pair of pristine, gleaming white sneakers stopped right in front of Leonard. These weren't the kind of shoes you'd commonly see on New York streets. They were the kind of shoes only the young and wealthy, living in a different, luxurious world, could afford. Even Leonard, who had grown used to the darkness and cold of the streets, had to squint against the light reflecting off those shoes. Leonard looked up, curiosity and surprise filling his eyes. Before him stood a young man, tall and poised, with shimmering blonde hair. He wore a sleek, sophisticated coat that looked like it belonged in a movie or on a TV show about the upper class. He wasn't like the others who rushed past Leonard, constantly checking their watches or hurrying on. This young man stood calmly, scrolling through his phone, seemingly unbothered by the curious glances around him. Everything about him was so natural, so composed, that Leonard almost couldn't believe his eyes. Then the young man looked up, his gaze resting on Leonard, not hurried, not dismissive, but filled with attention and care. He looked at Leonard as though trying to understand something not everyone could see when they looked at a homeless man. And then, in a moment that felt profoundly strange, the young man, Barron, whom Leonard immediately recognized, spoke. "What do you need?" Barron's question carried no hint of disdain or urgency. Instead, his voice was gentle, approachable, as if he genuinely cared about the answer. It wasn't the kind of question Leonard was used to hearing from passersby, people who never stopped. This question carried an understanding Leonard couldn't quite grasp. Leonard, sitting there in his ragged clothes, his eyes dulled by hunger and exhaustion, couldn't help but feel a slight stir in his heart. Barron Trump, the son of a powerful and famous family, stood before him, a man Leonard had only ever seen on TV, in magazines, or during interviews with his parents. And now here he was, standing right in front of Leonard, a man who had nothing but poverty and loneliness to his name. It was strange, but also deeply meaningful. Leonard didn't respond immediately. Questions flooded his mind. Why would someone like Barron stop? Why would he care about someone like Leonard? A man with nothing, a man no one noticed? Instead of voicing his chaotic thoughts, Leonard simply looked into Barron's eyes, feeling the sincerity behind his gaze. It wasn't the look of someone rushing to fulfill an obligation. It was the look of someone who truly wanted to know, to help. Barron stood there, his gaze gentle but unwavering. He didn't appear impatient or annoyed by Leonard's silence. Instead, he waited, giving Leonard the time he needed to respond. And Leonard, burdened by all that life had thrown at him, failure, despair, began to feel something unfamiliar, a sense of connection he hadn't experienced in a long time. Finally, Leonard spoke, his voice dry and hesitant, as though he was uttering something even he found hard to believe. I don't need anything," he said, pausing for a moment before continuing, his voice soft. "Maybe just a little kindness." Barron didn't say anything more, but the small, gentle smile on his lips was enough to make Leonard feel like he wasn't entirely invisible. There were no grand promises, no sweeping solutions, just the presence of someone who stood there and didn't turn away. In that moment, amidst the crowded streets and the biting cold of a New York winter, Leonard felt truly seen and understood. Barron Trump, the son of a famous family, wasn't just a passing figure. He did something few in society would do. He stopped, he looked, and he cared about someone the world seemed to have forgotten. For Leonard, it was a gift he never thought he'd receive in his lifetime. Barron's question wasn't just a casual inquiry, it was a statement, a reminder that in a world filled with hustle and indifference, there were still moments when people could stop and care for one another. At first, Leonard couldn't believe it. Why would this boy ask him anything? Why would someone like Barron Trump, the son of a wealthy, influential family, stand in front of him, a homeless man, and ask questions most people wouldn't even consider? Leonard glanced down at his ragged clothes, his worn-out shoes, and the hastily written sign, "Spare a dime." He knew his place in society. He was nameless, rootless, ignored. Yet here was this boy standing before him, without hesitation, without pity. Barron didn't seem hurried or judgmental. He remained there, his eyes never leaving Leonard's, showing no discomfort in their interaction. At that moment, Leonard felt like he was standing in front of something extraordinary. Unlike everyone else, Barron had taken the time to see him, to ask him something. And when Barron spoke again, His voice wasn't like the hurried remarks Leonard had heard from others over the past year. "How much do you need to get through the day?" Barron asked, his hands still tucked into the pockets of his expensive coat. His tone wasn't pitying or rushed. Instead, he asked calmly, as if it were the most natural question in the world. Leonard was stunned. This wasn't the kind of question he usually heard from strangers. Most people tossed him a coin or two and walked away without a word. But Barron didn't do that. He looked at Leonard as if he genuinely wanted to understand him. His question wasn't filled with cheap sympathy or fleeting concern. It was a real question, as though Barron wanted to know, "What do you need to survive? And is there a way I can help you see more than just surviving?" Leonard, still overwhelmed, let out a heavy sigh before replying, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Just $1, he said, his tired eyes dropping to the ground. In his mind, he thought of a warm cup of coffee to heat his body or a piece of bread to ease his hunger. Just a little, just enough to make it through the freezing night. But Barron didn't immediately reach for his wallet. Instead, he slowly crouched down, his face almost level with Leonard's. For the first time, Leonard felt the piercing gaze of someone who wasn't avoiding him, wasn't judging him. There was no awkwardness, no pity in Barron's eyes. "You know," Barron said softly, his voice gentle but firm, "it's not just about the money." He paused for a moment as if to ensure Leonard truly understood what he was about to say. "I want you to promise me something." Barron continued, his tone steady. "You have to help yourself after I help you." Leonard looked up, disbelief etched across his face. Did this boy just ask him to make a promise? Someone like Barron, living a life of wealth, luxury, and influence, was asking a homeless man like Leonard to commit to saving himself? It was something Leonard had never encountered before. He was used to one-sided acts of help, money tossed his way, food dropped in front of him, items given without a second thought, and people walking away without caring what happened next. But this was different. Barron didn't just want to help. He wanted Leonard to commit, to take responsibility for his own life. Barron wasn't just handing him money. He was offering Leonard an opportunity, a chance to stand up and start again. "You have to promise me, Leonard," Barron said firmly, his voice unwavering but not harsh. "You need to do something to change your life after I help you. Don't let me be the only one helping you." Leonard's heart pounded in his chest, struggling to comprehend what was happening. Barron's words were like a jolt, a necessary one. Part of Leonard felt challenged, while another part recognized the respect embedded in every word Barron spoke. This wasn't about pity, it was about belief. Barron didn't just want to give Leonard a coin. He wanted Leonard to achieve something greater. Though doubt lingered in his mind, Leonard couldn't deny that a small part of him, a stubborn and resilient part, wanted to try, wanted to change. He looked at Barron, feeling the sincerity radiating from the young man, even if he wasn't sure he could live up to such a promise. "All right," Leonard replied, his voice raspy, but carrying the faintest spark of hope. "I'll try." Barron smiled, a soft smile yet brimming with confidence. "Not just try, Leonard. Commit to yourself. That's what matters most." As Barron turned and walked away, Leonard remained seated in the cold New York winter. But this time he didn't feel as alone as before. Something had shifted within him. Barron hadn't just helped him get through a single day. He had shown Leonard a different path, one he could take, no matter how difficult. And though the future still loomed uncertain, Leonard couldn't deny that today, a new light had been kindled in his life. Leonard froze for a moment, his breath catching in his chest. Barron's words hit him like a hammer to the mind. "Help yourself," he whispered internally, unable to stop the thought from looping in his head. Barron's words, brief and simple as they were, carried a weight Leonard couldn't ignore. How could someone like him help himself when everything he once had long since fallen apart? He remembered a time not too long ago when his life had been full of promise. He had a happy family, a steady job at a factory, and a warm home to return to each evening. But then everything collapsed in a single devastating blow. The factory shut down due to financial troubles, and he lost his job. His health declined soon after, leaving him unable to keep up with the relentless pace of a changing world. One by one, his friends and colleagues drifted away, leaving him with no one to lean on but the cold streets of New York. These streets, filled with the hurried lives of strangers, had become his only refuge for over a year. Leonard had grown accustomed to feeling like he didn't belong anywhere. With each passing day, he felt more abandoned, more forgotten by the vast, uncaring world. But today, as Barron stood before him, something was different. Barron didn't look at Leonard with pity, nor did he laugh or judge. Instead, Barron looked at him as though he was a person capable of doing something for himself, if he chose to. Barron's gaze didn't make Leonard feel small or unworthy. On the contrary, it carried a connection, a sense of understanding Leonard hadn't felt in a very long time. When Barron spoke of helping yourself, Leonard didn't feel ashamed, nor did he feel diminished. Instead, for the first time in ages, he felt a warm wave spread through his chest like a faint light flickering in the thick darknesses he had lived in for so long. Yes, perhaps he couldn't undo the past, but he could do something to rebuild his future. Barron's words had struck a chord deep within him, a part of himself he had long forgotten. Leonard took a deep breath, the cold air cutting into his throat, and finally said, his voice hoarse but steady, "I'll try. I won't let myself fall again." These weren't empty words or a hasty promise. They were a commitment, even though he knew the road ahead would be anything but easy. Still, for the first time in years, Leonard felt a spark of motivation. Being seen, being understood, not as a failure but as someone who mattered, was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Barron smiled, a rare, warm smile lighting up his face. In that fleeting moment, Leonard felt as though the world, so cold and indifferent, had finally paused for him, offering a moment of peace. Barron said nothing more, but his gaze was filled with encouragement, as if he truly believed in the words Leonard had spoken. And then, Barron reached into the pocket of his sleek coat and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. The note gleamed, pristine and new in the pale winter light. "Here," Barron said simply, his tone steady. "You'll need this for more than just a cup of coffee." His words, though brief, carried far more weight than the monetary value of the bill. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the gesture. Barron wasn't merely giving Leonard money, he was giving him an opportunity, a shred of belief, and a reason to keep going. Leonard stared at the bill in his hand, feeling another shock course through him. It wasn't the value of the money that overwhelmed him, but the kindness behind it. The $100 bill couldn't change everything, but it was something Leonard had never dared to hope for, a gesture of genuine care, untainted by obligation or self-interest. Barron hadn't handed him the money because he pitied him, but because he believed Leonard was capable of something greater than mere survival. Barron had given Leonard something he had lost long ago, faith in himself. As Barron placed the bill into Leonard's hand, he added, "You know, I'm not giving you this because I pity you. I'm giving it to you because I believe you can do something bigger than just make it through the day. Remember what I said. Don't let yourself stay still. Move forward." Leonard stood frozen for a moment, the bill in his hand, unsure of what to say. It felt as though he had just been handed a priceless gift, but at the same time he felt the weight of a great responsibility. Barron believed in him, and Leonard could feel the burden of that belief pressing on his heart. How could he repay Barron for what he had just been given? Not the money, but the trust and hope. "Thank you," Leonard finally said, his voice low but firm. "Thank you for believing in me." The words came from the deepest part of his heart. It wasn't just gratitude for the bill. It was gratitude for the chance to change, for the opportunity to rise from the ruins and live a life that mattered. Barron nodded, his smile never fading. "No need to thank me. You'll see for yourself what you're capable of." And with that, Barron turned and walked away, disappearing into the busy streets of New York. Leonard stood there, alone once more, but this time he didn't feel the weight of isolation. He looked at the bill in his hand, warmth surging through him. This wasn't an ending, it was a beginning. Barron hadn't just handed him money, he had handed him belief in himself, a reason to stand up and keep moving forward. Though Leonard didn't yet know where he was headed, he now understood one thing. He was not invisible, nor forgotten. The road ahead would still be filled with challenges, but Leonard knew now that he didn't have to walk it alone. Leonard stared at the bill in his hand, feeling as if he were looking at something utterly foreign. He didn't know how to react, unable to comprehend what had just happened. This wasn't like the small amounts he had occasionally received from passers-by, coins or crumpled bills tossed his way without a second glance. This was something different. The bill handed to him by Barron, someone Leonard never imagined would care about him, felt like a symbol of trust, of hope. But Leonard couldn't shake his confusion. Could this boy really be serious? Leonard had grown too used to small, fleeting acts of charity, to gestures that barely scraped the surface of his hardships. He had never expected anything more significant. "Are you serious?" Leonard asked, his raspy voice barely hiding his astonishment. He looked at Barron, searching his eyes for some sign that this was a dream, one too good to be true. Barron's generosity, coming from the son of a famous and wealthy family, was beyond anything Leonard could have imagined. He had heard stories of the rich, those raised in luxury and power, but he had never thought one of them would care enough to help someone like him. Barron didn't seem surprised by the Leonard's question. He simply shrugged, as if there was nothing extraordinary about his actions. He continued to look at Leonard with calm composure, but there was something in his gaze that Leonard couldn't ignore. Barron wasn't looking at him with pity. No, his eyes carried something far deeper. It was a look that told Leonard Barron understood him, that Barron believed in his ability to change. It was a look Leonard hadn't seen from anyone in a very long time. "Things will only change when you decide you want them to," Barron said, his voice gentle yet filled with conviction. He wasn't speaking like someone trying to persuade or lecture, but like a friend, a companion, someone who believed in Leonard's potential. And as Barron spoke those words, Leonard felt as though a door had opened before him. He wasn't a failure, nor was he useless. He was a person who could change if he truly wanted to. Before Leonard could dwell too long on Barron's words, the young man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small piece of paper. He handed it to Leonard, the thin sheet feeling delicate in his calloused hands. To anyone else, it might have seemed unremarkable, but to Leonard, it was a lifeline, a chance he had never dared hope for. Written on the paper in neat, deliberate handwriting was an address. "Go there tomorrow morning," Barron said, his tone steady but not forceful. "They'll help you, but you have to go." Leonard looked at the paper, waves of unfamiliar emotions crashing over him. This wasn't just an ordinary act of kindness. It wasn't just another handout from someone walking by. This was an invitation, a suggestion, a guide leading him toward a different world, a world he had never thought he could be part of. Yet, as hope began to stir, doubt crept in. Could he take that step? Did he have the courage to seek the change Barron was pointing him toward? Barron didn't give Leonard too much time to question himself. The young man stood, preparing to leave, but before he did, he paused once more. He turned back to Leonard, his gaze full of encouragement and belief. "Remember what I said, Leonard," Barron said. "It all starts with one small decision, just one, and everything will change." With that, Barron walked away, disappearing into the crowded streets of New York. Leonard remained where he was, clutching the piece of paper tightly in his hand, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The city's noise seemed to fade, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Part of him couldn't believe what had just happened, but another part of him, a part long buried, began to feel a spark of hope. Perhaps this was the opportunity he had been waiting for all along, the opportunity he had missed for so long, a chance to change, to start over, to live a life that was more than mere survival. He looked at the paper again, memorizing the address before carefully tucking it into his coat pocket. He didn't know what awaited him at that place, but one thing he knew for certain: this was an opportunity he couldn't afford to miss. Barron believed in him. Now it was time for Leonard to believe in himself. He couldn't continue living as a shadow on the streets, waiting endlessly for change to find him. He had to choose his own path. Taking a deep breath, Leonard stood, feeling the winter's cold bite into his skin. But this time the chill didn't feel as harsh. He didn't feel as invisible, as forgotten. He felt like he was standing at the beginning of something new. It was just one step, the first of many. And though the road ahead was uncertain, at least now, Leonard had a reason to take it. With the paper in his pocket and a renewed sense of purpose, Leonard began to walk. The path before him was still shrouded in mist, but for the first time in a long time, he had a reason to move forward. Leonard held the slip of paper in his hand, feeling as though he was clutching his last chance, a chance he could not afford to waste. The small, fragile paper seemed unremarkable, but to him it was priceless. A strange sensation swelled within him, as though he was holding onto a tiny ray of light in the dense darkness of his life. For an entire year, Leonard had endured the freezing streets of New York, ignored by passers-by, untouched by helping hands. But today, everything felt different. Barron, the young man from a famous family, hadn't just handed him money. He had given Leonard an opportunity to change his life. It was something Leonard had never dared to dream of, a chance to rise from his shattered state and start over. As Barron walked away, Leonard stood still, gripping the paper tightly in his pocket. He watched Barron's figure vanish into the bustling crowd of New York, where people hurried past without a glance in his direction. But for Leonard, everything seemed to pause for a moment. The winter chill still pierced his skin, but his heart felt warm, as though a ray of sunlight had broken through the heavy clouds that had shrouded him for so long. Leonard didn't know what he would do next, or how the address on the paper might change his life. But for the first time in a long while, he had a reason to keep going, a reason to hope. He no longer felt like a shadow, invisible to the world. He felt a difference, however small, but it was enough to ignite a profound change within him. He looked at the slip of paper again before tucking it safely into his pocket. A new resolve began to form inside him. He didn't need to know everything right now. He only needed to take a step forward and allow things to unfold naturally. That was the only way he could change, and it was the lesson Barron had imparted. Nothing changed unless you decide to change. As Leonard began to walk, he felt a part of himself awaken. It wasn't the money or even Barron's words. It was the belief in himself that he was slowly reclaiming. He no longer saw himself as useless. Even in his hardest moments, he realized that with just one chance, one glimmer of hope, he could transform his life. And that slip of paper Barron gave him was his chance. He didn't know where this journey would lead, but for the first time, he had a path to follow. Leonard's story quickly began to spread. An onlooker, a stranger who had unknowingly witnessed the encounter, decided to record it. The image of Barron, a wealthy young man stopping to help a homeless man like Leonard, moved countless hearts. The stranger didn't just share the story with friends, they posted it on social media. Within hours, the brief encounter between Barron and Leonard had been shared thousands of times. Hashtags like #KindnessChallenge, #PayItForward, and #ChangeLives began to trend. People from around the world, touched by the story, started performing acts of kindness in their own lives. It was a wave, a surge of warmth and compassion. Stories of kindness and humanity began to flourish everywhere. Thousands shared their own tales of small but meaningful actions, inspired by Barron's gesture toward Leonard. These stories inspired even more people, creating a ripple effect that fostered a stronger community of kindness. People began taking part in challenges to spread good deeds, demonstrating how small actions could lead to profound changes, not just for individuals but for society as a whole. The posts, videos, and heartfelt messages on social media reminded Leonard that he wasn't alone in facing hardship. All of us, no matter who we are, encounter difficult times in our lives. But we can also rise again, finding the strength to change. Leonard no longer felt isolated. He understood that even though the road ahead would be long and challenging, he was no longer walking it alone. The next day, Leonard woke earlier than usual. He left the cardboard box he had called home for so long, feeling a new sense of determination. The streets of New York were just as busy and chaotic as they had been the day before. But for Leonard, everything had changed. He made his way to the address Barron had given him, his heart pounding, not from fear, but from hope. Hope that this would be the first step in transforming his life. When he arrived, Leonard stood before a tall, modern building. Nothing like the places he had been before. This was a resource center for people like him, a place where they could find help with housing, and healthcare. As he stepped inside, Leonard felt like he was entering a new world. Everything felt different here. The people at the front desk smiled at him, not with pity, but with genuine warmth and respect. Leonard didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: he wasn't being left behind anymore. He had been given a chance and he would do everything he could to make it count. He remembered Barron's words, "Bumming changes unless you decide to change." And Leonard understood that this was his moment to change, not just for himself, but for everyone who had believed in him. From that moment on, Leonard's life began to shift. He was no longer the homeless man living on a Broadway sidewalk. He found a job, made new friends, and most importantly, regained his belief in himself. And all of it began with one act of kindness from someone he never expected. Barron hadn't just changed a single day in Leonard's life. He had transformed Leonard's entire future. Leonard's story became a symbol of kindness, proof that even the smallest actions could spark monumental change. And as his story spread, it continued to inspire millions around the world. The next morning, Leonard woke up with a strange feeling. For the first time in months, he felt a flicker of hope, a faint, fragile thing weaving its way into his mind. He remembered Barron's words vividly, "Nothing will change unless you decide to change." Clutching the slip of paper Barron had given him, Leonard stepped out of the familiar corner of the street that had been his home for more than a year. He set off toward the address written on it. When he arrived, Leonard stood in front of a large, modern building with gleaming glass doors. A sign outside read, "Community Resource Center." His heart pounded in his chest. It had been so long since he had entered a place like this, a place where help might truly exist. He took a deep breath, holding the paper tightly in his hand like a talisman, and stepped inside. The interior was warm and welcoming, bathed in gentle light. People moved about, busy helping one another. A woman at the reception desk smiled as Leonard approached. Her smile carried no pity, no judgment, only genuine kindness. "Good morning," she said in a friendly tone. "How can I help you?" Leonard hesitated. He wasn't used to this kind of attention, but then, remembering Barron's words and his own determination, he replied, "I need help. I want to change my life." Those words felt like a weight lifting off his shoulders. The woman nodded and quickly directed him to a counselor. The middle-aged man, with a kind and approachable demeanor, listened to Leonard's story without interrupting. When Leonard finished, the counselor said, "You've already done the hardest part, Leonard. You've walked through these doors, and that's the first step to change." From that day on, Leonard's life began a new journey. The center provided him with temporary housing and connected him to skill-building workshops, helping him regain the confidence he had lost. Leonard attended training sessions, learned how to manage personal finances, and explore job opportunities. Day by day, he grew stronger and more self-assured. His story was no longer a tragedy. It became a testament to perseverance and the resilience of the human spirit. Weeks later, Leonard began receiving support not only from the center, but also from the community. A video of his encounter with Barron had gone viral on social media, becoming a symbol of kindness and compassion. Strangers from all over the world sent messages of encouragement, offered financial assistance, and even reached out with job opportunities. Leonard no longer felt isolated in the vast world. He began to believe that with effort, he could put his life back on track. One day, while attending a workshop at the center, something unexpected happened. A man with graying hair walked into the room, his face a mix of hesitation and emotion. Leonard recognized him instantly. It was Paul, his brother, with whom he had lost contact years ago. Paul approached Leonard without a word and embraced him tightly. It was a hug Leonard hadn't felt in so long, a connection he thought was gone forever. Paul trembled, tears streaming down his face. "I've left you alone for far too long, little brother," Paul said, his voice breaking. Leonard couldn't hold back his emotions. He buried his face in Paul's shoulder, his own tears falling freely. "I thought I had no one left," Leonard said, his voice hoarse. "But now I know I'm not alone." As it turned out, Paul had seen the viral video of Leonard and Barron on social media. He couldn't believe that his beloved brother had ended up in such dire circumstances. Paul immediately sought information about Leonard and reached out to the resource center to find him. "I was wrong to not look for you sooner," Paul said, his voice filled with regret. "But I won't let you go through this alone, ever again." Their reunion wasn't just the mending of a family bond. It marked the start of a new chapter in Leonard's life. With Paul's support, Leonard gained a newfound strength to move forward. Paul helped him secure a stable job, and with the skills Leonard had acquired at the center, he quickly adapted. Before long, Leonard found a small apartment he could finally call home, a place he hadn't had in years. Leonard's story continued to spread, inspiring thousands of people. Acts of kindness, big and small, rippled outward, sparked by Barron's initial gesture and amplified by the internet's reach. Leonard, once homeless, became a symbol of rebirth and hope. He began volunteering, helping others who had been in his position. He shared his story at community events, encouraging people to believe in the power of change. Whenever Leonard thought back to the moment Barron handed him that small slip of paper, he couldn't help but smile. It hadn't been just an act of kindness. It had been the beginning of everything. All it takes is one person to believe in you, and you can change your entire world, Leonard said during a speech. And he had proven that with his life. Today, Leonard isn't just surviving, he's living a life filled with meaning. He hasn't forgotten the struggles he endured, but he refuses to let them define him. With the support of Barron, Paul, and a caring community, Leonard rebuilt his life from the ground up. His story serves as a reminder that in the darkest times, a single act of kindness can illuminate not just one life, but the world. The story of Leonard and Barron is more than just a touching moment on the streets of New York. It has become a symbol of kindness, connection, and the power of small actions. What seemed like a fleeting encounter opened the door to change, not just for Leonard's life, but also for millions of hearts around the world. Shortly after the video of Barron and Leonard's conversation was shared, it spread like a wave of inspiration. Hashtags like #kindness challenge, #change lives, and #pay it forward flooded social media platforms. People from all corners of the globe began sharing the story, not just to praise it, but to spark acts of kindness in their own lives. A woman in California posted a photo of herself helping an elderly man load groceries into his car, captioning it, "If Barron can help Leonard, I can help someone today too." A businessman in Texas shared that he had sponsored tuition for a homeless student after hearing Leonard's story. This wave of goodwill didn't stop at small gestures. It became a driving force that reshaped how people viewed kindness and assistance in society. With the help of the resource center Barron had introduced him to, Leonard embarked on a new journey. He not only gained a safe place to stay, but also enrolled in skill-building courses, learned how to manage his finances, and sought employment opportunities. The early days were tough. Leonard had to confront fears and self-doubt that had lingered for years. But with each passing day, he realized he was stronger than he thought. Leonard didn't just find stability in his own life. He also discovered the profound joy of helping others. One day he returned to the resource center, not to seek help, but to volunteer and support others like him, people struggling to find light in their lives. "I never thought I'd stand here and say that I've made it through," Leonard shared, "but I have. And now I want to help others do the same." As Leonard worked to rebuild his life, an unexpected event unfolded. His long-lost brother, Paul, found him after seeing the viral video. Paul couldn't believe that his younger brother had endured so much hardship for so long. When they reunited, it was an emotional moment. Paul embraced Leonard tightly, tears streaming down his face. "I've left you alone for far too long, little brother," Paul said, his voice trembling. Leonard nodded, smiling through his own tears. "I thought I had no one left in the world," he said, his voice hoarse. "But now I know I'm not alone." Paul had been deeply moved by the video and immediately began searching for Leonard, eventually reaching out to the resource center. "I was wrong not to look for you sooner," Paul had admitted, "but I'll never leave you alone again." Their reunion wasn't just the restoration of a family bond, it was the start of a new chapter in Leonard's life. With Paul's support, Leonard found a stable job and moved into a small apartment, a place he could finally call home after years on the streets. Together, they rediscovered not only their relationship, but also their faith in the power of transformation, no matter where one starts. The story of Leonard and Barron stands as powerful proof that a small act can lead to monumental change. Barron didn't just give Leonard money or a slip of paper with an address. He gave Leonard trust, confidence, and a reason to move forward. Strangers on social media did the rest, turning this story into a global source of inspiration. For Leonard, the greatest lesson he learned was this: change begins with yourself, but you are never alone on that journey. A helping hand, a kind word, or simply believing in someone's potential can make a world of difference. For us, this story reminds us that kindness doesn't need to be extravagant or grand. A thoughtful question, A simple act of generosity or genuine attention can give hope to someone who desperately needs it. What do you think of Leonard and Barron's story? Have you ever met someone in need and wondered if you could make a difference? We'd love to hear your story. Share your acts of kindness or experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel so you won't miss more inspirational stories like this one. If you want to spread this story further, share the video with your friends and family, especially those in the United States. Who knows? A small action from you today might become a powerful source of inspiration for someone else. Let's create a better world together, because one small act of kindness can change an entire life.